My parents threatened to disown me if I didn't break up with my fiancé. They called him a deadbeat, a loser who would never amount to anything. Little did they know, the man they were insulting commanded more respect than they could ever imagine. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The tension in our family dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother, Patricia, sat rigidly in her chair, her manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table. My father, Robert, paced behind her like a caged animal, his expensive suit wrinkled from the stress of the past hour. "Samantha, this is absolutely ridiculous," my mother said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "You're 28 years old, for crying out loud. You should be settling down with someone who can provide for you properly." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. We'd been through this conversation countless times over the past 6 months, ever since I'd introduced them to Marcus. Each discussion seemed to get more heated than the last. "Mom, I love him. Isn't that what matters?" My father stopped pacing and turned to face me, his jaw clenched. "Love doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. This Marcus character of yours, what does he even do for work? You've never given us a straight answer." That was the problem. I couldn't give them a straight answer. Marcus had been very clear about the sensitive nature of his job from the beginning of our relationship. All I knew was that he worked for the government in some capacity, and that his work required a lot of travel and confidentiality. When my parents asked about his career, I could only offer vague responses about government consulting. "He works in government consulting." I repeated the same line I'd been using for months. "It's classified work, so he can't discuss the details." My mother scoffed. "Classified work? Samantha, please. He probably works at the DMV and is too embarrassed to admit it. No successful government consultant drives around in a beat-up Honda Civic." Marcus's car was indeed old and unremarkable. He'd explained that he preferred to keep a low profile, but I could see how that looked to my parents. They drove matching BMW sedans and lived in a gated community in Westchester County. Image meant everything to them. "You don't understand," I said, feeling my frustration building. "Marcus is different. He's not materialistic like us?" My father interrupted, his voice rising. "Samantha, your mother and I have worked our entire lives to build something substantial. I didn't climb my way up to senior partner at the firm so my daughter could marry some government pencil pusher who can't even afford a decent car." The unfairness of their judgment stung. Marcus was the most genuine, intelligent, and caring man I'd ever met. We'd been together for 2 years, and I'd never been happier. He treated me with respect, made me laugh, and challenged me intellectually in ways no one else ever had. "You haven't even tried to get to know him," I protested. "Every time he comes over, you barely speak to him." "What's there to know?" my mother asked, raising her voice. "He shows up to family dinners in khakis and polo shirts, while everyone else is dressed appropriately. He doesn't talk about his work, his family, or his future plans. He's a mystery man, Samantha, and not in a romantic way, in a concerning way." I thought about Marcus's reluctance to discuss his background. He'd mentioned growing up in Colorado, but details about his family were scarce. When I asked about his parents, he'd simply said they'd passed away when he was younger. His childhood seemed to be a sensitive topic, so I hadn't pushed. "Some people are private," I said defensively. "Private is one thing," my father said, returning to his chair. "Secretive is another. And frankly, Samantha, we're worried about you. You're talking about marrying a man who could be anyone. What if he's hiding something serious? What if he's in debt, or has a criminal record, or—" "Marcus would never." "You don't know that," my mother shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "That's exactly the point. You don't know anything about this man." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I stared at my parents, seeing the genuine worry in their eyes alongside their disapproval. They weren't just being snobby. They were scared for me. "He makes me happy," I said quietly. "Isn't that worth something?" My father's expression softened slightly. "Of course it is, sweetheart. But happiness isn't enough to build a marriage on. You need stability, security, shared goals. What happens when you want to buy a house? Have children? Send those children to good schools? Can Marcus provide any of that?" These were questions that had been nagging at me too, though I hated to admit it. Marcus and I had talked about the future in general terms, but specifics were always vague. He'd assured me that money wouldn't be a problem, but I had no concrete evidence of that. We haven't worked out all the details yet, I admitted. Exactly, my mother said, leaning forward. Samantha, you're a smart, accomplished woman. You have a master's degree in marketing. You work for a prestigious firm. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why would you tie yourself to someone who brings nothing to the table? He brings love, companionship, emotional support. And what else? My father asked pointedly. I struggled to find an answer. The truth was, I didn't know much about Marcus's financial situation. He paid for our dates, but we usually went to casual restaurants or stayed in. He'd never mentioned investments, property, or long-term financial planning. His apartment was modest, furnished simply but comfortably. I see we're getting somewhere, my mother said, noticing my hesitation. Samantha, we're not asking you to be mercenary about love, but we are asking you to be practical. You deserve someone who can match your ambition and success. Someone like David Morrison, my father added, with a meaningful look. I groaned internally. David Morrison was the son of my father's golf partner, a successful investment banker who'd been asking me out for years. He was handsome, wealthy, and came from a good family. He was also incredibly boring and had the personality of wet cardboard. Dad, please don't start with David again. I'm just saying, he's a good man with a bright future. His father says he's being considered for a promotion to vice president at his firm. That's the kind of stability we're talking about. The comparison felt like a knife twist. Here was David, whose entire life was an open book, whose success was measurable and visible, being held up against Marcus, who remained largely an enigma even after 2 years together. This isn't about David, I said firmly. This is about Marcus and me. No, my mother said, standing up abruptly. This is about your future, and we're not going to stand by and watch you throw it away. The finality in her tone sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean? My parents exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. We mean, my father said slowly, that if you insist on marrying this Marcus person, you'll be doing it without our support, financial or otherwise. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My parents had always been controlling, but they'd never issued an ultimatum this severe. You're not serious, I whispered. We are completely serious, my mother said, her voice ice cold. We will not watch our daughter ruin her life. If you choose him over common sense, then you choose him over us. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. So you're asking me to choose between the man I love and my family? We're asking you to choose between a fantasy and reality, my father said, between a stable future and an uncertain one, between what's best for you and what feels good right now. The weight of their words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I looked around the dining room where I'd shared countless family meals, where we'd celebrated holidays and milestones, where I'd always felt safe and loved. Now it felt like a courtroom where I was being sentenced. I need time to think, I said, standing up on shaky legs. Take all the time you need, my mother said coldly, but understand that our position won't change. It's him or us, Samantha. Choose wisely. I drove home through the winding streets of Westchester in a daze, my parents' ultimatum echoing in my mind. The familiar route to my apartment in Manhattan felt longer than usual, each mile taking me further from the life I'd always known and closer to an impossible decision. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How did dinner go with your parents? Hope it went better this time. I stared at the message at a red light, unsure how to respond. How could I tell him that my parents had essentially declared war on our relationship? That they'd threatened to cut me off completely if I married him? We need to talk when you get home, I typed back, my hands trembling slightly. His response came immediately. On my way back from D.C. now. Should be there by 10. Is everything okay? D.C. He was always traveling to Washington for work, sometimes for days at a time. These trips were never planned far in advance, and he could never tell me much about them beyond, quote, government meetings. I'd grown accustomed to his sudden departures and mysterious schedule, but now my parents' words echoed in my head. What if they were right? What if I really didn't know who I was planning to marry? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I pulled into my apartment complex's parking garage, my mind racing. In the elevator up to the 14th floor, I tried to imagine how this conversation would go. How do you tell someone you love that your family considers them worthless? How do you ask questions you should have asked 2 years ago without sounding like you don't trust them? My apartment felt unusually quiet as I opened the door. Marcus had left a coffee mug in the sink and a book on military strategy on the coffee table. Something he was always reading. I'd never paid much attention to his reading material before, but now I found myself picking up the book and flipping through it. The margins were filled with notes in his precise handwriting, observations about logistics and command structure that seemed far more sophisticated than what I'd expect from a mid-level government consultant. I set the book down and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. My reflection stared back at me, and I barely recognized the worried woman I saw. When had I become someone who doubted the person she planned to spend her life with? The sound of keys in the lock made me turn around. Marcus stepped through the door, still wearing his charcoal gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked worn from frequent travel. Even after a long day, he moved with a confident, almost military bearing that I'd always found attractive. "Hey," he said, setting down his briefcase and crossing the room to kiss me. "You look upset. What happened?" I pulled back slightly, studying his face. Marcus was undeniably handsome, tall, with short dark hair and intense green eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. But tonight, instead of finding comfort in his familiar features, I found myself searching for clues about who he really was. "My parents want me to break up with you," I said bluntly, deciding there was no point in easing into it. His expression didn't change, but I noticed his jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. "I see. And what did you tell them?" "I told them I love you, and that their opinion shouldn't matter." I sat down heavily on the couch. "But, Marcus, they threatened to disown me if I marry you." "Cut me off completely." He was quiet for a long moment, loosening his tie as he processed this information. "I'm sorry, Sam. I know how important your family is to you." "That's it? That's all you have to say?" My voice came out sharper than I'd intended. "They basically called you a loser who would drag me down, and you're just going to accept that?" Marcus sat down beside me, his movements careful and controlled. "What would you like me to say? That they're wrong? You already know they are. That I'm upset? Of course I am. But getting angry won't solve anything." His calm response only frustrated me more. "Don't you want to defend yourself? Tell them about your accomplishments, your career, your plans for our future?" "You know I can't discuss my work in detail." "But you could give them something, Marcus. Anything. They think you're hiding something terrible, and your secrecy isn't helping." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign he was stressed. "What exactly are they concerned about?" "Everything. Your job, your background, your financial situation. They want to know what kind of future you can provide, and honestly, so do I." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "We've been together for 2 years, and I feel like I know less about you now than I did when we first started dating." Marcus turned to face me fully, his green eyes serious. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Your childhood, your family, your real job, your finances. I want to know why you drive a 15-year-old Honda when you could probably afford something better. I want to know why you disappear to Washington at a moment's notice. I want to know why you read military strategy books and why you never talk about your past." He was quiet for so long that I wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and careful. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 18. I was raised after that by my uncle, who was in the military. I joined the service myself right after college." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "My work with the government is exactly what I've told you, consulting on security matters. The travel, the confidentiality requirements, all of that is real." "But what kind of security matters? What's your actual job title? Who do you work for?" "Sam, you know I can't. Can't or won't." I stood up, pacing to the window and back. "Because there's a difference, Marcus. My parents think you're hiding something, and right now I'm starting to wonder if they're right." Quote, The hurt that flashed across his face made me immediately regret my words, but I didn't take them back. I needed answers. You think I'm lying to you? I think you're not telling me the whole truth. And maybe that was okay when we were just dating, but we're talking about marriage now. I need to know who I'm marrying. Marcus stood up and walked to his briefcase, pulling out a business card. He handed it to me without a word. The card was simple, cream-colored with black text. It read, Marcus Thompson, Senior Defense Consultant, Department of Defense. There was a phone number with a DC area code, but no other details. This tells me nothing I didn't already know, I said, handing the card back to him. It's what I can give you right now. Right now? What about next week? Next month? After we're married? My voice was rising, 2 years of suppressed questions finally bubbling to the surface. When do I get to actually know my husband? Sam, please try to understand. No, you try to understand. I moved away from him, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional gap I was suddenly feeling. I defended you to my parents tonight. I told them they were wrong about you, that you were a good man with a bright future. But when they asked me for specifics, I had nothing. Nothing, Marcus. He sank back onto the couch, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. For a moment, the confident, controlled man I knew seemed to crack, revealing something vulnerable underneath. There are things about my work, about my life, that I can't share with you. Not because I don't trust you, not because I don't love you, but because there are rules, protocols, security clearances involved that are bigger than both of us. Then maybe we're not ready to get married, I said quietly. The words hung between us like a chasm. Marcus looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely shaken. Is that what you want, to postpone the wedding? I sat down across from him, suddenly exhausted. I don't know what I want anymore. A few hours ago, I thought I was going to have to choose between you and my family. Now I'm wondering if I even know who you are. You know who I am, Sam. I'm the same man I've always been. But that's just it. I don't think I ever really knew who that was. The next 3 days passed in an uncomfortable limbo. Marcus had moved back to his own apartment to give me space, and the silence between us felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I threw myself into work, staying late at the marketing firm and accepting every project that crossed my desk. But nothing could distract me from the growing certainty that my life was falling apart. My best friend Jessica noticed my distress immediately when we met for lunch at our usual spot in Midtown. You look like you haven't slept in weeks, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. What's going on? I told her everything. My parents' ultimatum, my confrontation with Marcus, the growing doubts about our entire relationship. Jessica listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic noises. So, what are you going to do? She asked when I finished. I honestly don't know. Part of me thinks my parents are right. Maybe I am being naive about Marcus. But another part of me thinks they're just being controlling and elitist. Jessica stirred her salad thoughtfully. Have you tried doing your own research? What do you mean? I mean, you work in marketing. You know how to investigate things. Have you ever actually looked into Marcus's background? Googled him? Checked social media? I felt embarrassed that I hadn't thought of something so obvious. We started dating before social media background checks became standard practice. And honestly, I trusted him. Trust is great, but verification is better, especially when you're talking about marriage. Jessica pulled out her phone. What's his full name again? Marcus Thompson. She typed rapidly, her fingers flying across the screen. Okay, so there are obviously thousands of Marcus Thompsons, but let's see. Did he go to college? University of Colorado, I think. He mentioned it once. More typing. Jessica's eyebrows furrowed as she scrolled through results. That's weird. I'm not finding any Marcus Thompson from University of Colorado who fits his age range. What about high school? He grew up in Colorado Springs, but I don't know which school. Jessica spent the next 20 minutes conducting what she called a basic boyfriend audit, checking various databases and social media platforms. Her expression grew more puzzled with each search. Sam, this is really strange. I can't find any trace of your fiancé online. No Facebook, no LinkedIn, no Twitter, no Instagram, no college records that I can access, no professional associations, nothing. A chill ran down my spine. Maybe he just values his privacy. Or maybe Marcus Thompson isn't his real name. The possibility hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on what Marcus wasn't telling me that I hadn't considered he might be lying about fundamental facts. People don't just disappear from the internet, Jessica continued. Even if he's private, there should be some trace. A work profile, a mention in a news article, something. The only people who are completely scrubbed from public records are either in witness protection or what? Or they work in intelligence. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at Marcus's business card. The Department of Defense phone number seemed to mock me from the white cardstock. I'd been carrying it around for 3 days, too afraid to call it and too afraid not to. Finally, I dialed the number. Department of Defense. How may I direct your call? The voice was professional and impersonal. I'm trying to reach Marcus Thompson. He's a senior defense consultant. There was a pause. Can you hold, please? I was transferred twice before a different voice came on the line. This is Colonel Martinez. You're asking about Marcus Thompson? Yes, I'm his fiancé. I just wanted to verify his employment. Another pause, longer this time. Ma'am, I'm going to need to call you back. Can you provide your full name and phone number? The request sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Why would they need to call me back to confirm someone's job? I gave them the information anyway, and Colonel Martinez promised to return my call within the hour. When my phone rang 45 minutes later, I answered on the first ring. Miss Patterson, this is Colonel Martinez. I've spoken with my superiors about your inquiry regarding Marcus Thompson. And? I can confirm that Mr. Thompson is employed by the Department of Defense, but I cannot provide any details about his position or responsibilities. If you need additional information, you'll need to speak with Mr. Thompson directly. But I'm his fiancé. Surely you can tell me something about what he does? Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but even family members don't automatically have access to classified information about our personnel. Mr. Thompson's work requires the highest level of security clearance. Quote, After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, processing what I'd learned. Marcus really did work for the Department of Defense, but in some capacity that required such high security clearance that even confirming basic details required approval from his superiors. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can we talk? I have something important to tell you. My heart raced as I read the message. Had he somehow found out about my calls? Was he finally ready to tell me the truth? Come over, I texted back. He arrived 20 minutes later, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. He was carrying a manila envelope, which he set carefully on my coffee table. I know you called the Pentagon today, he said without preamble. My cheeks burned with embarrassment and anger. Are you having me monitored? No, but calls inquiring about certain personnel are automatically flagged and reported. Colonel Martinez called me as a courtesy. Marcus sat down across from me, his posture rigid. Sam, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you cannot be shared with anyone. Not your parents, not your friends, not anyone. Is this about your real job? Yes. He opened the manila envelope and pulled out several documents. My full name is Marcus Alexander Thompson. I hold the rank of General in the United States Army, and I currently serve as the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. What? The Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's the highest-ranking military advisory body in the country. We advise the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council on military matters. The words didn't seem real. I looked at the documents he'd spread on the table. Official military records, commendations, a photograph of Marcus in full dress uniform standing next to people I recognized from news broadcasts. You're a general? My voice came out as barely a whisper. I've been in the military for 15 years. I started as a second lieutenant and worked my way up through the ranks. The consulting work I told you about is real. I consult with the highest levels of government on national security issues. I picked up one of the photographs, studying Marcus's face in a military dress uniform. He looked different, more authoritative, more commanding. This was the man who'd been making me breakfast and watching Netflix with me for 2 years? Why didn't you tell me? Quote, because my position requires absolute discretion. Very few people know my real identity when I'm not in official settings. It's a security measure. But I'm your fiancé. Which is exactly why I'm telling you now. Because if we're gonna get married, you need to know who you're marrying. I set down the photograph, my hands shaking slightly. So when you disappear to Washington, I'm briefing the president, attending National Security Council meetings, coordinating with other military leaders. The travel, the secrecy, the security clearance, it's all real. The magnitude of what he was telling me began to sink in. Marcus wasn't just employed by the government. He was one of the most powerful military officers in the country. While my parents had been calling him a deadbeat, he'd been helping make decisions that affected national security. The car, the modest apartment, keeping a low profile, that's all intentional? Partly for security, partly because I don't need material things to feel successful. But Sam, if we get married, your life will change dramatically. There will be security protocols, background checks, restrictions on travel and social activities. Are you prepared for that? I looked at this man I thought I knew, realizing I was seeing him clearly for the first time. The confidence, the way he carried himself, his calm under pressure. It all made sense now. The silence in my apartment stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I stared at the military documents spread across my coffee table, trying to reconcile the man sitting across from me with the images of him in full dress uniform, standing alongside the Secretary of Defense and other high-ranking officials whose faces I recognized from news broadcasts. Say something, Marcus said quietly, his voice betraying a vulnerability I'd never heard before. I don't know what to say. I picked up another photograph, this one showing him receiving what appeared to be a prestigious military decoration. How long have you held this position? I was appointed vice chairman 18 months ago. Before that, I was a major general overseeing strategic operations in the Pacific Command. 18 months ago. We'd already been dating for 6 months by then, and I'd had no idea that the man I was falling in love with had just received one of the most important military appointments in the country. The night we met at that coffee shop near NYU, I said slowly, you were in New York for work. I was attending a classified briefing at the UN. The coffee was a coincidence, but meeting you... He paused, searching for words. That changed everything for me, Sam. For the first time in my career, I had something in my life that mattered more than the mission. I stood up and walked to the window, needing distance to process this revelation. The city sparkled below us, and I wondered how many other secrets were hidden behind those glowing windows. You let me defend you to my parents, I said, turning back to face him. You sat there while they called you a failure, a deadbeat, someone with no prospects. You let them humiliate both of us. Marcus's jaw tightened. I couldn't exactly announce my military rank at your family dinner. But you could have found a way to give them something, anything, to show them you weren't what they thought. And compromise operational security? Put you at risk? He stood up, his posture shifting into what I now recognized as his military bearing. Sam, there are protocols in place for a reason. The fewer people who know my real identity, the safer everyone is. Your real identity, I repeated. So Marcus Thompson, government consultant, that's just a cover story? It's a simplified version of the truth. I do consult for the government, and Marcus Thompson is my legal name. But yes, the full extent of my position and responsibilities is classified. I sank into my armchair, feeling overwhelmed. What else don't I know about you? Marcus sat back down, leaning forward with his hands clasped. I've told you everything I can. My childhood in Colorado, my parents' death, my uncle who raised me. All of that is true. The military academy, working my way up through the ranks, the deployments overseas, it's all real. Deployments? This was the first I'd heard of any overseas military service. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. I was a field commander before I moved into strategic planning. He reached into the envelope and pulled out another document. This is my complete service record. You can read through it if you want. I took the papers but didn't look at them immediately. Instead, I studied Marcus's face, searching for any sign of the man I thought I knew. The books on military strategy, the way you analyze news about international conflicts, how you always seem to know more about global politics than you let on. That's because you're actually involved in making those decisions. Sometimes, yes. And when you disappear for days at a time, I'm briefing the president on military threats, coordinating with NATO allies, planning strategic responses to international crises. The day I proposed to you, I'd just come from a 12-hour Situation Room meeting about potential conflict in the South China Sea. The memory of that evening came flooding back. Marcus had seemed unusually tense when he'd arrived at my apartment, but I'd attributed it to work stress. He'd gotten down on one knee right there in my living room, pulling out a simple but elegant ring that I'd later learned belonged to his grandmother. "How do you do it?" I asked. "How do you compartmentalize everything? Make life and death decisions during the day and then come home and pretend to be a normal person?" "Because being with you is the only time I get to be a normal person." His voice was soft, genuine. "Do you have any idea what it's like to carry the weight of national security on your shoulders every single day? To know that decisions you make could affect millions of lives? When I'm with you, I can just be Marcus, not General Thompson." The vulnerability in his admission hit me harder than any of the revelations about his military rank. I looked at this man who wielded enormous power and influence, and saw someone who was desperately trying to hold on to a piece of ordinary human connection. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on you. If you want to proceed with the marriage, there will be extensive background checks, security clearances, lifestyle changes. You'll be briefed by security personnel, and there will be protocols you'll need to follow." "What kind of protocols?" Marcus pulled out another document from the envelope. "This outlines the security requirements for immediate family members of Joint Chiefs personnel, travel restrictions, communication monitoring, social media limitations, restrictions on certain types of employment." I scanned the document, my eyes widening with each paragraph. I wouldn't be able to travel internationally without prior approval? Not to certain countries, and never without security notification. Will my phone calls and emails be monitored? Periodically, yes. Quote, "I couldn't post freely on social media? You'd need to avoid any content that could compromise operational security or reveal personal details about our relationship." The scope of the restrictions was staggering. I'd be trading my current life for one where every decision would be filtered through the lens of national security. And if I can't handle all of that? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then we'd have to end our engagement. The finality of his words settled between us like a wall. I understood now why he'd been so secretive, why he'd seemed reluctant to talk about the future. He'd been protecting not just classified information, but protecting me from having to make this exact choice. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "Of course, but Sam, there's something else you should know." Marcus gathered up the documents and photos, placing them back in the envelope. "Your parents' ultimatum has a deadline, doesn't it?" I nodded. "They want an answer by this weekend." "Well, there's a military gala next Saturday night. It's a formal event honoring various service members and their contributions. The president will be there, along with other high-ranking officials." Marcus stood up, straightening his jacket. "If you decide you want to proceed with our engagement, if you think you can handle what comes with being married to me, then come to the gala as my guest. And if I don't show up, then I'll understand that this life isn't for you and I'll respect your decision." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Sam, I want you to know that whatever you decide, these past 2 years have been the happiest of my life. You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing." After he left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by silence, trying to imagine my life going forward. In one direction lay the familiar path my parents wanted for me, marriage to someone like David Morrison, a conventional life with conventional challenges. In the other direction lay Marcus, and a future I couldn't even fully comprehend, filled with security briefings and state dinners, and the constant weight of secrets. But there was a third option I hadn't fully considered until now. What if I took Marcus to meet my parents one more time, armed with the truth about who he really was? What if I gave them the chance to see him as he truly was, instead of the facade he'd been forced to maintain? The idea was risky. Marcus had made it clear that revealing his identity was a serious security breach. But my parents' deadline was approaching, and I needed to know if there was any possibility of having both the man I loved and the family I'd grown up with. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus's number. "I have an idea," I said when he answered, "but you're not going to like it." "Absolutely not." Marcus's voice was firm through the phone. "Sam, what you're suggesting could compromise everything I've worked for." I paced around my apartment, clutching the phone tighter. But what if it's the only way? My parents' deadline is in 3 days. If I don't give them an answer, they'll assume I've chosen you over them. Then maybe that's what has to happen. His resignation frustrated me. "You're willing to let me lose my family without even trying to find another solution?" There was a long pause. "What exactly are you proposing?" I took a deep breath, knowing how crazy this was going to sound. "I want to invite my parents to dinner, just the 4 of us, and I want you to tell them who you really are." "Sam, I can't just casually reveal classified information over pot roast." "Not the classified details, just your rank, your position, enough to show them they were completely wrong about you." "Do you understand what you're asking? There are protocols for disclosure, background checks that would need to be run on your parents, security clearances." "Then let's do them," I interrupted. "You said yourself that if we get married, my family would eventually need some level of clearance anyway." Marcus was quiet for so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke. "There might be a way. Let me make some calls." The next morning, I woke up to find 3 missed calls from Marcus and a text that simply read, "It's arranged. Dinner tomorrow night at your place. Wear something formal." I spent the entire day in a state of nervous energy, cleaning my apartment obsessively and planning a menu that would impress my parents. This dinner felt like the most important meal of my life, the moment when everything I'd been building toward would either come together or fall completely apart. I called my parents that afternoon, trying to keep my voice casual. "I'd like you both to come to dinner tomorrow night. Marcus and I have something important to discuss with you." My mother's voice was cold. "If this is about your engagement, Samantha, our position hasn't changed." Quote, "Please, Mom, just give us one more chance. I think you'll be surprised by what Marcus has to tell you." There was a muffled conversation as she consulted with my father. "Fine, but this is the last time we're having this discussion." I spent that evening researching military protocol, trying to understand the significance of Marcus's position. The more I read about the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the more amazed I became. The vice chairman was essentially the second highest-ranking military officer in the entire country, someone who worked directly with the president on matters of national security. The next evening, I changed clothes 3 times before settling on a navy blue dress that struck the right balance between formal and approachable. Marcus arrived an hour before my parents, wearing his civilian clothes but carrying a garment bag. "I need to change," he said, heading toward my bedroom. Tonight, they meet General Thompson. When he emerged 20 minutes later, I barely recognized him. Gone was the casual, understated man I was used to seeing. In his place stood someone who commanded immediate respect. Marcus in his full dress uniform, chest decorated with ribbons and medals, posture ramrod straight, every detail immaculate. "Oh my God," I whispered. "This is who I am, Sam. This is what I've been trying to protect you from." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. My parents had arrived. I opened the door to find them both dressed formally, my father in a dark suit and my mother in an elegant black dress. They looked like they were attending a funeral rather than a dinner party. "Hello, sweetheart," my mother said, kissing my cheek perfunctorily. "Where's Marcus? We might as well get this over with." "He's in the living room." I led them through my apartment, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. As we rounded the corner into the living room, both of my parents stopped dead in their tracks. Marcus stood at attention near the window, his uniform gleaming under the overhead lights. The transformation was so complete that for a moment, I wondered if my parents might not even recognize him. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard before. "Thank you for coming." My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish. My mother simply stared, taking in every detail of Marcus's appearance. The stars on his shoulder boards, the ribbons across his chest, the bearing of someone accustomed to command. "I believe formal introductions are in order," Marcus continued. "I am General Marcus Thompson, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, United States Army." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents looked between Marcus and me, clearly struggling to process what they were seeing and hearing. Joint Chiefs, my father started, then stopped. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, Marcus confirmed. I serve as the principal military advisor to the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. My mother sank into the nearest chair without invitation. You're a general? I've been in military service for 15 years. I currently hold one of the highest-ranking positions in the United States Armed Forces. My father found his voice. But your car, your apartment, you said you were a consultant. I am a consultant, sir. I consult with the highest levels of government on matters of national security. As for my lifestyle choices, I prefer to maintain a low profile for security reasons. I watched my parents' faces as the reality of the situation dawned on them. The man they'd dismissed as a worthless deadbeat was actually one of the most powerful military officers in the country. The secrecy, my mother said weakly. The trip to Washington. Classified briefings, National Security Council meetings, strategic planning sessions. Much of my work requires the highest level of security clearance. My father looked like he might be sick. We had no idea. That was intentional, sir. Very few people outside of government circles know my identity when I'm not in official capacity. It's a necessary security measure. I moved to stand beside Marcus, drawing strength from his presence. This is why I couldn't give you specifics about his job. This is why he couldn't defend himself when you questioned his prospects. My mother looked up at me, her face pale. Samantha, why didn't you tell us? Because I didn't know either, not until 3 days ago. Marcus stepped forward slightly. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, I owe you an apology. I understand that my secrecy has caused tension in your family. That was never my intention. An apology? My father said, his voice cracking slightly. General, we're the ones who owe you an apology. We said terrible things. You were protecting your daughter. As a father myself someday, I hope I would do the same. My mother stood up slowly, smoothing her dress. General Thompson, we made assumptions, unfair assumptions. You made logical deductions based on the limited information available to you. I don't fault you for that. The formal politeness of the conversation felt surreal. My parents, who had spent months berating Marcus, were now speaking to him with the deference typically reserved for visiting dignitaries. May I ask, my father said hesitantly, what your intentions are regarding our daughter? Marcus's posture remained rigid, but his voice softened slightly. I love Samantha more than I've ever loved anyone or anything in my life. I want to marry her, with your blessing, and spend the rest of my life making her happy. And your career, the demands of your position, will always be secondary to my family. I've already discussed with Samantha the lifestyle changes that marriage to me would entail. If she's willing to accept those challenges, then I'm prepared to do everything in my power to minimize their impact on her happiness. My mother looked between Marcus and me, tears forming in her eyes. We've been fools, haven't we? The question hung in the air, laden with the weight of months of conflict and misunderstanding. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw not the controlling, elitist people I'd been angry with, but two individuals who had genuinely believed they were protecting their daughter from making a terrible mistake. You were being parents, I said softly. Overprotective maybe, but parents. The dinner that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. My parents, who had barely spoken to Marcus during previous encounters, now hung on his every word. The transformation was so complete it was almost comical, if it weren't so deeply emotional. General, may I ask about your service overseas? My father inquired, cutting his steak with the careful precision of someone trying to impress a dinner guest. Marcus had relaxed slightly, though he maintained his military bearing throughout the meal. I served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, primarily in leadership roles coordinating joint operations with allied forces. That must have been incredibly dangerous, my mother said, her voice filled with a concern that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. All military service carries risks, Mrs. Patterson, but I was fortunate to serve alongside some of the finest soldiers our country has ever produced. I watched this surreal conversation unfold, marveling at how quickly the dynamic had shifted. My parents weren't just being polite. They were genuinely fascinated by Marcus, asking thoughtful questions about military strategy, international relations, and his career progression. "How does someone become vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs?" my father asked. "That seems like an extraordinary achievement for someone your age." Marcus set down his fork, considering his response carefully. "It's a combination of performance, leadership experience, and timing. I was fortunate to have mentors who guided my career and opportunities to demonstrate capability in increasingly complex situations." "And the security clearance requirements?" my mother asked. "This must affect every aspect of your life." "It does, which is why I've been so cautious about revealing my position. The fewer people who know, the better for everyone's safety." My father leaned forward. "Including Samantha's safety?" "Especially Samantha's safety. Marriage to someone in my position comes with inherent risks and lifestyle restrictions that most people never have to consider." The weight of that statement settled over the table. My parents exchanged a look that I recognized, the same expression they'd worn when I was a child, and they were silently communicating about something serious. "What kind of restrictions?" my mother asked gently. Marcus glanced at me before answering. "Background investigations, security protocols, limitations on travel and social activities." Samantha would essentially be signing up for a life where privacy is a luxury and security is a constant consideration. "And you're willing to accept that, sweetheart?" my father asked me directly. It was the first time all evening that the focus had shifted back to me. I looked around the table at these three people who meant everything to me, realizing that for the first time we were having an honest conversation about my future. "I'm still processing everything," I admitted. 3 days ago, I thought I was engaged to a government consultant. Now I'm learning that I'm in love with one of the most powerful military officers in the country. It's a lot to absorb." Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. "Sam, if any of this is too much, if you decide you can't handle what comes with being married to me, I'll understand. I'd rather lose you than watch this life destroy your happiness." The vulnerability in his voice broke my heart. Here was this incredibly accomplished, powerful man, and he was genuinely afraid that the woman he loved might not be able to accept who he was. My mother cleared her throat softly. "General Thompson, may I speak frankly?" "Of course, ma'am. My husband and I owe you a tremendous apology. We made assumptions about your character based on incomplete information, and we treated you poorly as a result. We were wrong, and we're deeply sorry." Marcus nodded graciously. "I understand your concerns. If I had a daughter, I would want to know everything about the man she planned to marry." "But that's just it," my father interjected. "We didn't want to know about you. We had already decided you weren't good enough for Samantha, and we weren't willing to look beyond our prejudices." The admission hung heavy in the air. My parents rarely acknowledged their mistakes so directly, and never with such genuine remorse. "The ultimatum we gave Samantha," my mother continued, her voice shaking slightly, "was cruel and unfair. We were so convinced we knew what was best for her that we nearly destroyed her relationship with a truly remarkable man." I felt tears pricking at my eyes. This was the moment I'd been hoping for without even realizing it. Not just acceptance of Marcus, but genuine acknowledgement from my parents that they had been wrong. "What matters now," my father said, "is what's best for both of you going forward. General, you clearly love our daughter deeply. And Samantha, it's obvious that you love him just as much. If you can both handle the challenges that come with your unique situation, then you have our complete support." Marcus squeezed my hand gently. "There's something else you should know. This Saturday there's a military gala honoring various service members. It's a formal event, and the president will be in attendance." My parents' eyes widened simultaneously. "I've invited Samantha to attend as my guest," Marcus continued. "It would be her first public appearance as my fiancé, and it would essentially announce our engagement to the military and political establishment." "That's a big step," my mother observed. "It is. Which is why I wanted her to have time to consider everything before making that commitment." Quote, I looked at Marcus, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since we'd met. Not as the mysterious government consultant I'd fallen in love with, not as the powerful general who had shocked my parents, but as the man who had somehow managed to balance an incredibly demanding career with genuine love and partnership. "I have a question," I said, addressing the table but looking directly at Marcus. If we get married, if I accept all the security protocols and lifestyle changes, what does our actual life look like? Not the restrictions and complications, but the day-to-day reality of being married to you? Marcus smiled, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd been dating for 2 years. It looks like morning coffee and terrible jokes. It looks like me coming home exhausted from briefings, and you helping me remember there's a world outside of national security concerns. It looks like us figuring out how to build a normal life inside very abnormal circumstances. And children? My mother asked softly. Would be raised with additional security considerations, yes, but they would also grow up understanding service, sacrifice, and the importance of contributing to something larger than themselves. My father nodded slowly. Those aren't necessarily bad values to instill in a child. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from wedding planning to long-term career considerations. As the evening wound down, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. We were no longer debating whether Marcus was worthy of our family. We were discussing how to integrate him into it. As my parents prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside while Marcus and my father discussed something by the door. Sweetheart, I want you to know that whatever you decide about Saturday night, about the marriage, about all of it, you have our love and support. We were wrong to try to control your life, and we're sorry. I know, Mom, and I understand why you were worried. If I were in your position, I probably would have reacted the same way. She hugged me tightly. He's a good man, Samantha. More than good, he's exceptional. If you can handle the unique challenges of his world, I think you'll have an extraordinary life together. After they left, Marcus and I stood in my kitchen, both of us still processing what had just happened. So, he said, loosening his tie slightly, that went better than expected. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I think that might be the understatement of the century. Have you decided about Saturday? I looked at this man who had turned my world upside down in the best possible way. The man who had carried the weight of national security while somehow still making me feel like the most important thing in his life. Yes, I said, moving closer to him. I have. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Washington, D.C. look particularly majestic. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the emerald green evening gown I'd purchased specifically for this occasion. The dress was more formal than anything I'd ever owned. Floor-length silk with delicate beading that caught the light when I moved. Marcus had arranged for a stylist to help me prepare, explaining that appearances at military galas were scrutinized by both media and high-ranking officials. Every detail mattered, from my jewelry to my posture. The woman who had spent the afternoon transforming me into someone suitable for a presidential reception was a true professional, but even she seemed slightly nervous about the significance of the evening. Remember, she'd said while applying the final touches to my makeup, you'll be photographed extensively tonight. These images will likely be used in official publications and news coverage. You're not just Marcus's fiancé. You're about to become a public figure. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than the formal dress I was wearing. A soft knock on my apartment door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Marcus in his full dress uniform, but this time with additional decorations and insignia that I hadn't seen before. He looked every inch the high-ranking military officer he was. Distinguished, commanding, and undeniably impressive. You look absolutely stunning, he said, offering me his arm. You clean up pretty well yourself, General. The car waiting downstairs wasn't his usual Honda Civic. Instead, a black sedan with tinted windows and 2 additional security vehicles flanked us as we made our way through the city. The reality of Marcus's position became more apparent with each block we traveled. Nervous? He asked, noticing my hands fidgeting with my clutch. Terrified, I admitted. I'm about to meet the President of the United States, and 3 days ago I didn't even know my fiancé was a general. Marcus took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. The President is actually quite personable in private settings, and everyone there tonight will be more interested in the military honors than in scrutinizing you. The Kennedy Center was transformed for the evening, with red carpet leading to the entrance and photographers positioned strategically along the walkway. As our car pulled up, I could see other guests arriving, Men in military dress uniforms accompanied by women in elegant evening wear, civilians in formal attire, and what appeared to be several foreign dignitaries. "This is it," Marcus said as the car door opened. "Are you ready?" I took a deep breath, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The months of secrecy, my parents' ultimatum, the shocking revelations, and finally, the reconciliation that had brought us here. "Yes," I said, surprised by the confidence in my own voice. "I'm ready." The flashes from cameras were immediate and intense as we stepped onto the red carpet. Marcus moved with practiced ease, nodding to photographers and occasionally pausing for pictures. His hand on my back provided steady guidance as we navigated the media gauntlet. Inside the Kennedy Center, the transformation was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over hundreds of guests, military bands provided background music, and elegant floral arrangements adorned every surface. The scale and grandeur exceeded anything I'd ever experienced. "General Thompson," a voice called from across the room. We turned to see a distinguished older man in civilian formal wear approaching us. Even before Marcus made introductions, I recognized him from news broadcasts, the Secretary of Defense. "Mr. Secretary," Marcus said, extending his hand, "thank you for hosting such a wonderful event." "The pleasure is entirely ours, General. Your contributions to national security have been exemplary." The Secretary turned to me with a warm smile. "And you must be the famous Samantha we've heard so much about." My cheeks burned slightly. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Secretary." "The honor is mine. Marcus has spoken of you frequently during our meetings. It's clear you mean a great deal to him." As the evening progressed, I was introduced to a parade of influential figures: senators, foreign ambassadors, military leaders, and eventually, the moment I'd been most nervous about. "Samantha, I'd like you to meet the president," Marcus said quietly. I turned to find myself face to face with the most powerful person in the world. The president was shorter than I'd expected, but carried himself with unmistakable authority. "Miss Patterson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Marcus tells me you work in marketing?" "Yes, Mr. President. I specialize in strategic communications for corporate clients." "Excellent skill set. We could probably use someone with your expertise dealing with congressional relations," he said with a laugh that seemed genuine rather than political. The conversation continued for several minutes, with the president asking thoughtful questions about my work and background. His manner was surprisingly informal and engaging, making me forget momentarily that I was speaking with the leader of the free world. As the evening's formal program began, Marcus and I took our seats at a table near the front of the room. I recognized several faces from the news: high-ranking military officers, prominent senators, and international dignitaries. The realization that I was now part of this world, that this would be my life going forward, was both thrilling and overwhelming. The ceremony itself was moving, honoring various service members for their contributions to national security. When Marcus's name was called for a special recognition, I watched with pride as he walked to the podium. The citation read aloud detailed his leadership in complex international operations, his role in developing strategic military policy, and his commitment to excellence in service. Standing at that podium, addressing the most powerful people in the country, Marcus looked completely in his element. This was who he truly was. Not the modest consultant I'd fallen in love with, but a leader whose decisions affected millions of lives. After the ceremony, as we mingled during the reception, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, watching the coverage on C-SPAN. "You look beautiful, and we're so proud of both of you." The simple message brought tears to my eyes. Just a week ago, my parents had been threatening to disown me. Now they were watching their daughter on national television, proud to see her standing beside one of the most respected military leaders in the country. "Everything all right?" Marcus asked, noticing my emotional reaction. "More than all right," I said, showing him the text. "Everything is perfect." Quote. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Marcus pulled me aside onto a quiet balcony overlooking the Potomac River. "So," he said, "how was your first official event as the fiancé of a Joint Chiefs member?" "Exhausting, exhilarating, and completely surreal," I replied honestly, "but also wonderful. I can see why you love what you do." "And can you see yourself being part of this world? Really?" I looked back through the windows at the elegant gathering we'd just left. then at the man beside me who had somehow managed to be both a high-ranking military officer and the most caring partner I'd ever had. Marcus, 3 months ago I thought my biggest relationship challenge was convincing you to meet my parents for dinner. Tonight I shook hands with the president and discussed foreign policy with a NATO commander. If I can handle that adjustment, I think I can handle anything. He smiled, pulling me closer. There's something I need to tell you. After tonight, after you've been publicly identified as my fiancé, there's no going back to anonymity. Your life will never be completely private again. I know. And I'm okay with that, because I'd rather have an extraordinary life with you than an ordinary life without you. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. In that case, I think it's time we made this official. Marcus, you already proposed. I already said yes. That was when you thought I was a government consultant. This is me asking you to marry General Marcus Thompson, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, with all the complications and challenges that come with that position. He opened the box to reveal a different ring, still elegant and tasteful, but clearly more significant than the simple band he'd originally given me. This ring was worthy of state dinners and diplomatic receptions. Samantha Patterson, knowing everything you now know about who I am and what our life together will entail, will you marry me? I looked at this remarkable man who had somehow managed to serve his country at the highest levels, while still making me feel like the most important person in his world. The challenges ahead would be real. The security protocols, the public scrutiny, the demands of his position. But they seemed insignificant compared to the love we shared and the extraordinary life we could build together. Yes, I said, holding out my hand for the new ring. Yes, I'll marry you, General Thompson. Quote. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized that sometimes the best love stories are the ones where you discover that the person you fell in love with is even more amazing than you ever imagined. My parents had been wrong about Marcus, but they'd been right about one thing. I deserved someone extraordinary. I just hadn't realized I'd already found him. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.